Hello, and welcome to Ancient Stories in English. This is a channel for people who are learning English. We tell stories from history, we speak slowly. We use simple words. We do not use special effects or complicated language. But today's story is not simple, and it may change the way you see good and evil. It is the story of a man who was called a monster, but who may have saved millions of lives. It is the story of a man who wrote beautiful poetry, and also ordered terrible acts of war. It is the story of a man history remembers as a villain, but who built the foundation of an empire. His name was Cao Cao. And before we judge him, we must first understand the world he lived in. Now, let us begin.
But first, one small note. This story is told from my own perspective. It is how I see Cao Cao and his world. You may agree, you may not, and that is completely fine. History is not a single truth. It is a conversation. If you see things differently, I welcome that. Share your thoughts. Let us discuss. That is how we learn together. Now, the story.
Imagine a country that is falling apart. Roads are empty, villages are burned, there is no food, there is no safety. People are dying, not just from war, but from hunger, disease, and fear. This was China near the end of the Han Dynasty, around the year 190 AD. For 400 years, the Han Dynasty had ruled China. It was one of the greatest empires in the ancient world. At its strongest, it had over 56 million people. But by the end, it was broken. Corrupt officials controlled the emperor. Powerful warlords fought each other for land. Peasant rebels burned cities. The emperor had no real power. War came, then famine, then disease. By the time the chaos ended, decades later, historians believe only 16 million people remained. Think about that number for a moment. More than 40 million people gone, not in one battle, not in one disaster, but slowly across years of violence and hunger and collapse. That means entire families disappeared, entire villages erased. This is the world Cao Cao was born into. This is the world he chose to fix. China did not need a kind man. China needed someone who could act. He was not born into great power. He was the grandson of a palace servant, a man with low social status. But he was brilliant. He studied war, politics, and poetry from a young age. He saw the chaos around him, and he made a decision. He would not wait for someone else to fix the world. He would fix it himself. One of the first things Cao Cao did was change how he chose his people. In ancient China, most leaders chose their advisors and generals based on family. If you were born into a noble family, you had power. If you were not, you did not matter, no matter how smart or skilled you were. Cao Cao rejected this idea completely. He sent out a message to all the lands he controlled. The message said this: "I do not care about your family. I do not care about your past. I only care about one thing. Can you help me bring order to this world?" This was an extraordinary idea for his time. He hired men who had worked as farmers. He hired men who had been in prison. He hired men who had once fought against him. If they were talented, he wanted them. One of his most famous advisors, Guojia, was a young man from a poor family. But Guojia was one of the most intelligent military minds of his generation. Under a different leader, Guojia would have had no opportunity. Under Cao Cao, he became one of the most important men in the empire. There is a lesson here that is still true today. Do not judge a person by where they came from, judge them by what they can do. Cao Cao understood this, long before most of the world did. Cao Cao did not build loyalty first, he built capability first. But winning wars with talented people is not enough. An army needs to eat. A country needs food. Remember those numbers from the beginning: 56 million people, reduced to 16 million. Most of those deaths were not from swords. They were from hunger. When wars destroy farms, farmers stop farming. When farmers stop farming, there is no food. When there is no food, people die quietly, in their homes, in the fields, on the roads, millions of them. This was happening across all of China. But it was especially bad in the north, the territory Cao Cao controlled. And yet, something remarkable happened. Of the three great kingdoms that emerged from the chaos, way in the north, Shu in the southwest, and Wu in the southeast, Wei became the most stable, the most populated, the most economically powerful. Why? Because Cao Cao solved the food problem first. In Cao Cao's time, millions of people had left their farms because of war. Fields were empty. There was almost no food in the north of China. Soldiers were starving. Common people were starving. Even warlords were starving. Cao Cao looked at this problem and made a very practical decision. He created a system called Tunxian, which we can translate as military farming or the field colony system. The idea was simple but powerful. Soldiers who were not fighting would work on the land. Abandoned fields would be given to homeless people who would farm the land in exchange for a share of the food. The government would keep part of the harvest. The farmers would keep part. Everyone would benefit. Within a few years, Cao Cao's territory had food, real food, enough to feed armies and civilians. This was not heroic, it was necessary, but it was exactly what was needed. A king without bread is a king without a kingdom. Cao Cao understood that before you can build an empire, you must first make sure people can eat. Now, here is something that might surprise you. Cao Cao, this man of war, this cold and calculating leader, was also a poet. And not just any poet. He is considered one of the greatest poets of his era. One of his most famous poems is called Duange Xing, Short Song. He wrote it at night, beside a river, before a great battle. He looked up at the stars. He thought about time. He thought about how short life is. He wrote, "Life is short, like the morning dew. Days pass quickly. There is so much sorrow." These are not the words of a monster, but they are the words of a man who still chose war. These are the words of a man who felt deeply, a man who understood loss, a man who carried the weight of 1,000,000 lives on his shoulders and still found time to look at the moon and write about it. This is what makes Cao Cao so difficult to understand and so interesting. He was a man of two faces. In the morning, he planned battles. He made hard decisions that caused suffering. He was ruthless, without mercy, when he believed it was necessary. But at night, he was something else, a thinker, a poet, a man who wondered if everything he was doing was worth it. There is a famous saying that is often connected to his name. Whether he truly said these words, historians are not certain, but the words have followed him through history. I would rather betray the world than let the world betray me. This sounds selfish. It sounds like the words of a villain. But consider the context. Cao Cao lived in a world where trust could get you killed, where friends became enemies overnight, where showing weakness meant death, not just for you, but for everyone who depended on you. He was not saying, "I don't care about other people." He was saying, "I cannot afford to be naive. Too many lives depend on me." This is the duality of Cao Cao. Tyrant and poet, ruthless and brilliant, villain and builder. Cao Cao lived in China in the 3rd century AD. But the type of man he was, history has seen him before, in different countries, in different languages, with different names. Before we look at those names, let us listen to Cao Cao himself. He once said, "If you do not trust a man, do not use him. But if you use him, trust him completely." And he said this, "In every matter, think 3 steps ahead before you take 1 step forward." These are not the words of a cruel man acting without reason. These are the words of a builder, a strategist, a man who thought carefully about everything, including the people around him. And when we look at Western history, we find men who thought the same way. Think about Julius Caesar. Caesar was a Roman general and politician who lived 200 years before Cao Cao, brilliant at war, an outsider who fought his way to the top, a man who held real power while keeping the old government, the Roman Senate, alive in name only. And like Cao Cao, history has never stopped arguing about him. Was Caesar a destroyer of the Roman Republic, or was he the only man strong enough to hold Rome together when it was tearing itself apart? Sound familiar? The same question follows Cao Cao across 2,000 years of Chinese history. Now think about a book, a very famous book written in Italy in the year 1513. The book is called The Prince. The author was Niccolò Machiavelli. Machiavelli wrote The Prince for leaders. It was a guide, a very honest and sometimes shocking guide about how power really works. He wrote things that made people uncomfortable. He wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." People called Machiavelli evil. They called his ideas dangerous. But Machiavelli was not celebrating cruelty. He was describing reality. He was saying, if you want to build something that lasts, you must be honest about how the world actually works, not how you wish it worked. Cao Cao never read The Prince, but he lived it. He lived 1,000 years before Machiavelli was born. But if Machiavelli had studied Cao Cao, he might have said, "This man understood everything I was trying to explain." Both men believed the same thing. In a broken world, the leader who tells comfortable lies will fail. The leader who faces uncomfortable truths and acts on them has a chance to build something real. Cao Cao was not a Western figure. His world, his culture, his values were deeply Chinese. But the question he represents is universal. How much are you willing to sacrifice, and how honest are you willing to be to build something that matters? But for all his brilliance, Cao Cao's greatest dream remained unfinished. He spent his entire life fighting. He united the north of China. He ended the power of corrupt officials. He protected the last Han emperor, while also controlling him completely. He gave millions of people something they had not had in decades: stability, order, safety. But he wanted more. He wanted to unite all of China under one rule. In the year 208 AD, Cao Cao marched his enormous army south. He had over 200,000 soldiers. He believed he could end the chaos once and for all. But at a place called the Red Cliffs, a river in southern China, his army was destroyed by fire. His southern enemies used burning boats as weapons. The wind turned against him, and Cao Cao, for perhaps the first time in his life, was forced to retreat. He never tried again. In his final years, he was old and tired. He suffered from terrible headaches. He had lost friends, sons, and advisors to war. He had built something great, but he knew he would not see it finished. He died in the year 220 AD. After his death, his son Cao Pi finally declared a new dynasty, the Wei Dynasty. The Han Dynasty officially ended. But it was Cao Cao who had done the real work. He never wore the imperial crown, but he carried the weight of an empire. History has not been kind to Cao Cao. In the famous novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms, he is the villain. He is portrayed as cold, cruel, and selfish. For centuries, Chinese people learned to see him as the enemy. But history is complicated. The warlords who called themselves righteous, did they bring peace? No. The generals who claimed loyalty to the Han Emperor, did they feed the hungry? No. Cao Cao did not have perfect values. He made terrible decisions. He caused real suffering. But he also built something from nothing. He created order in a world of chaos. He fed people who were starving. He chose talented people over noble people. He preserved what was left of civilization when everything was falling apart. Was he a monster? Or was he the only one brave enough to do what was necessary? I will leave that question with you. Think about it. And ask yourself this: would you choose a kind leader who fails, or a difficult leader who succeeds? There is no easy answer. And that is exactly why he still matters today. And perhaps that is the most important lesson of Cao Cao's life. Thank you for listening to Ancient Stories in English. If this story made you think, please share it with someone who loves history. We will see you in the next story.